Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. I am ASHISH and in this video I will teach you about the anatomy of soft palate. As you have seen in the previous videos, the palate was divided into two. The anterior foreface was called the hard palate, while the posterior foreface was called the soft palate. So in the previous video, the hard palate, we come to know that the hard palate is a bony structure which is made up of two bones, palatine process of maxilla and the horizontal process of the palatine bone. In this video, we will focus on the soft palate and see its the structure, composition and function. Soft palate is a muscular soft flap which hangs down from the posterior border of the hard palate. So let's understand the basics of the soft palate with the help of a model. So consider this as a plane of the palate. So palate anterior forefoot is made up of hard palate, which is signified with green color, and the posterior forefoot is made by the soft palate. So the soft palate is not lie horizontally, it is somewhat curved like this. So in a body, if you see, hard palate and soft palate is present in this anatomical position. Hard palate is composed of two bones, that we have the palatine process of maxilla and the horizontal process of the palatine bone, and while the posterior foot we have the soft palate, which is a muscular flap and is made up of 5 different muscles, which we will see in the later part of this video. So it is not straight. See, hard palate has only two surfaces, a nasal surface and a oral surface, or you can see superior surface and a inferior surface. So downwards we have the oral cavity and above this we have the nasal cavity. So the soft palate is bent like this. So it has got an anterior surface, a posterior surface, a upper border and a lower border. So the 4 external features of a soft palate includes the two surfaces, an anterior surface, a posterior surface, a superior border and a inferior border. Along the inferior border we have a conical projection which is called the vulva, which we will study in the upcoming part of this video. So soft palate is a muscular flap which hangs down from the posterior border of the hard palate. As you can see, this is the free posterior border of the hard palate, and from here the soft palate hangs. Let's talk about the external features that we discussed. So it has got an anterior surface which is also called the oral surface because it is facing the oral cavity. Okay, so this is facing the oral cavity, that's why it's also called the oral surface. So it has got a shape is that of concave. You can see it is curved like this. So it is a concave surface and is present a median raphe. What do you understand by raphe? See, these muscles or sometimes the fiber structure, when they cross like this, then they in the center a line is formed. That's called a raphe. So on the anterior side, which is a concave, a median raphe is present by the interlocking of fibers and muscles. So it has a central median raphe. So this point also you should remember. What about the posterior surface? It is convex from outside. If you see from outside, it is convex and it is continuous with the floor of the nasal cavity. As you can see, this is the floor of the nasal cavity and is continuous with the posterior surface of the soft palate. These two are the very basic points that you can easily tell by seeing this model. What about the superior border? So you can see the superior border, it is attached to the posterior free border of the hard palate. This is only single point you have to remember in the case of the superior border. And what of the inferior border? It is free. As you can see, the inferior border is not attached to any structure and it is free, and it contains a conical projection which is called the vulva. So vulva is present on the inferior free border of the soft palate, which is a conical structure. And its shape is like that of a tongue. So it is tongue shaped conical structure. So it is a tongue shaped conical structure which hangs down from the middle of the inferior border of the soft palate. Now let's talk about the structural composition of this soft palate. As you all know, it is a muscular structure. So it may be made up of muscles as well as some fibers are also present. So it is a fold of mucous membrane. This soft palate is covered by a mucous membrane which is lined by a specific epithelium. So it is a fold of mucous membrane in which 5 pairs of muscles are present. So before discussing the 5 pairs of the muscles that we have, let's talk about the epithelium lining these two surfaces. The posterior surface is lined by different epithelium and the anterior surface is lined by different epithelium. Why? Because this is facing the nasal cavity, and the nasal cavity epithelium should be ciliated, while the epithelium facing the oral cavity, it should be stratified squamous epithelium, which is made up of different layers. As it is, there are more chances of damage by the external environment. That's why they are stratified. Now let's talk about the lining surface. Suppose this is a plane of the soft palate, and above we have the posterior surface or the nasal surface, and here we have the oral surface. Above it is lined by the nasal part is lined by the which type of epithelium? It is pseudo-stratified. Stratification helps the protect from the external damage. So it is pseudo-stratified, ciliated. As you all know, the nasal epithelium is always ciliated, and this is which type? Columnar. So that facing the nasal side is the pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium, while facing the oral cavity, it should be also be stratified, okay, and non-keratinized. So the epithelium lining the oral cavity or the oral side, this side lining the oral cavity, it is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. The another point that you must know in the case of the soft palate structure is that the mucous glands are present. Mucous glands will be obviously present in the submucosa. So in the submucosa, we have the mucous gland, especially around the vulva. Okay, if you see here, look at the vulva, I made main dotted structure. So these are signifying the mucosal glands which are present in the submucosa. Now let's talk about the muscle. We have got 5 muscles to remember in the case of the soft palate, that are the tensor palati, levator palati, palatoglossus, palatopharyngeus, and musculus olvae. So only musculus olvae is the intrinsic muscle. Intrinsic. What do you understand by intrinsic and extrinsic? Intrinsic means it is a part of that particular structure, while the extrinsic means it originates from a different structure and contributing to the structure of that particular thing. Okay, so its origin is from a different structure, that is called the extrinsic. The rest all 4 muscles are extrinsic. Only the muscular olvae is the intrinsic muscle of the soft palate. So we have got 5 pairs of muscles. Trick to remember is tell mummy papa. Okay, tell tensor palati and levator palati. Okay, tell. We have a mummy papa, musculus olvae, and papa stand for palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus. This way you can easily remember the 5 pairs of muscle of the soft palate. So let's talk about some points of this muscle also. We are not going to discuss in detail about the origin insertion, otherwise the video will be too long. In this video we'll talk about the general points that you should know. Tensor palati, it's very easy to remember. It is a triangular muscle. So tensor palati, remember T for triangle, so it is a triangular muscle. These questions are usually asked in the viva part. So in details I am not discussing the origin, insertion and action, but some point you should know. What was the levator palati? It is cylindrical. Tensor palati is triangular, levator palati is slender. Okay. What about the palatoglossus? Palatoglossus originates from the oral surface of the Palatine Aponeurosis. Palatine Aponeurosis is mainly formed by the tensor palati muscle. What happens? Let me draw a diagram to help you better understand this muscles in a simplified way. So this is the spine of sphenoid. What I have done, I have made cross section of the skull and reached up to the soft palate. Okay. Suppose if you start making cross section from this side, we have made a cross section and removed this part, and like that we have reached this part in the more deeper side of the oral cavity. If you make a cross section over here, what all structure you can find in the skull. So this is the spine of the sphenoid. Here we have a roof or gap, then we have the body of sphenoid. Okay, so it is also easier to make a triangle, then a semicircle, then again triangle, a rectangle, then repeat the same thing again. This pointed structure over here is the spine of sphenoid. Spine of sphenoid bone. This triangular structure over here is the body of sphenoid. body of sphenoid, and in this circular structure or this circular groove we have one circular structure which is called the auditory tube. So here we have the auditory tube, especially the cartilaginous part of the auditory tube. Auditory tube. And which part? Cartilaginous. It has got two parts, cartilaginous and bony. So which part lies here? In this part of the body cross section we have the cartilaginous part. Let's see how the muscles. First muscle that we are going to see is the tensor palati and the levator palati. Tensor palati is situated more outward or more laterally, while the levator palati is situated medially. So it originates from somewhere, not exact details I am discussing, some part of the auditory tube and the spino-sphenoid. It proceeds downwards. It hooks over the pterygoid hamulus. Here we have got the pterygoid hamulus. So it hooks over here, make a hook like this, pterygoid hamulus. Then it is converged to form the Palatine Aponeurosis in the center part. So here got the Palatine Aponeurosis. And Palatine Aponeurosis is the origin of musculus olvae muscle. So here we have got the longitudinal strands of the musculus olvae. So similarly, this is the, we have got the 5 pairs of muscle. So this was the tensor palati. Similarly, we have the tensor palati from this side as well. And the pterygoid hamulus is present here also. The next muscle is the levator palati. As I told you, it is situated more medially. This part is called the, this triangular part is called the petrous part of the temporal bone. So this triangular part is petrous part of temporal bone, which marks the origin of the levator palati. So this is the levator palati, which is further attached to the Palatine Aponeurosis from both sides. As you can see, both the palati muscles are originating from some part of the auditory tube that we are discussing in a separate video. So these are the 2 pairs of muscle, levator palati and tensor palati. What are the palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus? See, pharyngeus is situated laterally. So palatopharyngeus, let me show it is a different color. Palatopharyngeus is situated laterally. Okay, and the palatoglossus is situated medially, because the tongue is situated medially, that's why palatoglossus is situated also medially. So this is palatoglossus, and this is palatopharyngeus. So this is a general diagram to show about the 5 pairs of muscles of the soft palate. So you can remember by this, PP, TP is situated laterally. Okay, PPTP, palatopharyngeus, and the which is muscle tensor palati is situated laterally. So you remember, only have to remember these 2, other 2 can also automatically derive. PPTP is situated laterally. Now let's talk about the arterial supply. जो इसकी जो arterial supply होती है, ये one of the other branches of the external carotid artery होती है. As you all know, carotid artery is divided into internal carotid and the external carotid. External carotid is mainly responsible for the supply of, or the blood supply of the internal carotid supply the head and external carotid supply the head and neck, while the internal carotid supplies the brain. So arterial supply, the trick to remember is palate, PAL, or you can also remember by reverse lab. So the arterial supplies from the palatine branches of the ascending pharyngeal, which is a branch of external carotid. Then we have the ascending palatine branch of facial and the lesser palatine branches of the maxillary. Remember by palate, PAL, first 3 words of the palate, or just in the reverse order lab. Now venous drainage is into the pterygoid and the pharyngeal venous plexus. So in this diagram you can see the pterygoid venous plexus, which is a very important point of discussion, which we will discuss in a separate video. So if you like the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe and share the channel. Now let's talk about the lymphatic drainage. Lymphatic drainage is also very important. The hard palate and the soft palate mostly drain into the retropharyngeal and the upper deep cervical nodes. Okay, what about the nerve supply? Nerve supply may be motor to the muscles and the sensory from the palate. Motor is by the trick to remember is Mandy top in the class while the rest pass. Mandy stands for mandibular nerve, mandibular, which is branch of trigeminal. Mandibular top means mandibular supplies the tensor muscle, that is a tensor palati, while rest of the muscle, that is the levator palati, palatoglossus, palatopharyngeus and the musculus olvae is supplied by the pars, that is the pharyngeal plexus, which is formed by the cranial root of accessory, which I have already discussed in the brain part. Pharyngeal plexus. What about the sensory supply? Take to memory is the LPG. So remember as a whole, mandate, top, rest, pass in LPG exam. Okay. LP stand for, you have to take LP together, lesser palatine nerves. Lesser palatine. And G you might be knowing because you have already discussed in the cranial nerve section. That's the glossopharyngeal nerve. Glossopharyngeal nerve. So nerve supply is also very simple. Mandate, top, rest, pass in LPG exam. Glossopharyngeal nerve. And at last, let's talk about the clinical. If there is a muscle paralysis of the muscles of the soft palate, how can there be paralysis of the muscles of palate? See, these nerves, this motor supply, if it is damaged, either maybe the pharyngeal plexus damage, which is made up by the 11th cranial nerve, okay, or the accessory cranial nerve, or the mandibular nerve, that is branch of the trigeminal nerve. If it's a damage somewhere in the course, then it can lead to the paralysis of the muscles of soft palate. So whatever thing you eat from the mouth may regurgitate through the nose because the closure of the nasopharynx is not there. Okay, so palate helps in the closure of the nasopharynx so that there is only one path for the food or the liquids. But if there is paralysis of this muscle, it will lead to the nasal regurgitation of liquids. There will be nasal twanging voice. It may seem that the person is speaking through his nose. That's called the nasal twanging voice. There may be flattening of the palatal arch on the side of the lesion. Suppose, as it's drawn in the diagram, suppose this is the palatal arch, this is the vulva, and this is the palatal arch. If the nerve supplying this side of muscle is damaged, then the palatal arch will be flattened like this. But the deviation of the vulva will be the opposite side. Okay, vulva deviates to the opposite side while the flattening of palatal arch occurs on the same side of the lesion. So this was all about the soft palate. If you liked the video, hit the like button and do subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.